Welcome back to Dylan's World podcast. Today I sat down with Colin McHarg. We had a real cool, pretty short conversation regarding his work. He is a mushroom farmer, mycologist, and overall enthusiast. He works for Two River Mushroom, based in Millstone, New Jersey. They supply a lot of the grocery stores, restaurants in the area, and it was really cool to chop it up with him and to learn what he does. So enjoy the show. All right, cool. We're rolling. Well, thanks for saying yes. I appreciate you doing this.
Of course.
I'm curious about your Instagram. Super cool with all the mushrooms and a little bit of background on that, which is cool. So I'm definitely curious about learning more about that. I've been curious about just that whole realm for a while, and I'm not familiar at all, other than the fact that I find it cool and interesting. So why don't you just give people a little bit of background on how you came to get into mycology and mushroom farming, and how sort of how you stumbled into it and where your interest started.
Yeah, so just before 2020, I used to be an auto mechanic and kind of realized that wasn't for me. I was trying to look for something else that made me feel fulfilled, like a job that I thought I was actually accomplishing something. So COVID hit, and that's when I started getting into foraging.
Mm.
So that kind of just looking for mushrooms taught me a whole bunch about how they grow and what kind of conditions they're looking for. Then the owner of Two River is Casey Sullivan. So he was a science teacher where we went to high school, Middletown South. He reached out to me. He said, "I see you're into mushrooms. I have a position if you're into it." So I just jumped right in, just kind of started growing mushrooms. He had a good operation set up already. So it was just a shipping container with humidifiers and air exchanges and stuff like that. So it was a good place to start. It was pretty small. We didn't have a lot of customers at the time. So that was 2020. 4 years later, almost 5 years later now, we're in a good amount of ShopRites in New Jersey. So growing with the company has just been the best way to learn for me.
And so you guys are supplying the stores. Are you supplying restaurants as well?
Yeah. So that's where we started. It was mostly restaurants, upscale, like really fancy restaurants on the coast. We had Red Horse. That's a David Burke restaurant. It's pretty big. We have Angelica's and Seabright. They've been with us, I think, since the farm started in 2014. And then branching out to retail has been interesting. It's definitely a lot more work than just picking mushrooms, throwing them in a big bin, and dropping them off at a restaurant. But yeah, it's it's just a lot of work.
What's the? I mean, I'm sure it differs per type of mushroom, but I would like. What's the? I have no baseline on like the process of even getting started. So how do you? I mean, I don't even know how to properly ask this question, but like, what would the process look like if you're trying to start a grow for, whatever type of mushroom you might sell to a retail store or to a restaurant? What's the starting point look like?
So the mushrooms we grow are hardwood loving mushrooms. So in the wild, they'd be growing off a dead tree or a living tree. So we just get basically sawdust of any hardwood tree. Usually it's mixed hardwood sawdust. That's most of the nutrients that the mushrooms need. Then we add in, excuse me.
You're good.
We add in some soy pellets. That adds a little bit of extra nitrogen, so it kind of kickstarts the growth, so they grow a little bit faster. But basically, if you're growing mushrooms, all you need is a substrate, something that contains the food that it's accustomed to eating in the wild. You have to
Mm-hmm.
sterilize that to get rid of any competition, germs or bacteria or anything like that. Um, so you sterilize it, then you have to bring it into a lab. I started out doing lab work in my closet next to my cat's litter box. So
Mm-hmm.
they're not super picky.
Mm-hmm.
It's more when you get on a big scale, you got to have an actual lab with like clean air and everything. Anyone can grow mushrooms start to finish in their house.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people work over their oven, just with the oven on and the door cracked, just to have that's basically sterile air coming up out of the oven.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's a lot of really cool ways to grow mushrooms just with nothing, basically.
Mm-hmm. And
They
what
just want
what
to grow.
what kind do you are like? What are common for you to grow at least?
So a lot of oyster varieties,
Mm.
blue oyster, yellow oyster. I brought one actually.
Sweet.
So this is the oyster mushroom.
Oh, that's awesome.
Um, there's a bunch of different versions of these. Some grow, some grow bigger, some grow smaller. They have different flavors.
Mm.
Um, they grow the fastest of any mushroom. It takes like less than a month, start to finish.
Mm.
Um, we also grow lion's mane. We have piopinos, chestnuts. They're just other gourmet kind of mushrooms, typical mushroom looking mushrooms.
Mm. And there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of like narrative around the. I've seen you post some of it too, but with lion's mane, there's a lot of like implications for health. And then I think you posted about reishi. Um, do you have any sort of background on that, or do you kind of just like you're just interested in it and you have researched it a bit? Um, just curious.
So,
Yeah, go ahead.
so that was another one of the main reasons I got into growing mushrooms. I had some weird health stuff going on before
Mm,
2020 even. Um, I got addicted to painkillers eventually, so turned to honestly psychedelic mushrooms first before anything else. That was a huge help with as far as addiction goes.
mm-hmm,
Um, and then I was still dealing with weird pain and all sorts of weird stuff. So that led me to the medicinal mushrooms, and
mm-hmm,
reishi in particular has helped me a lot. Um, it's really good for immune system stuff. So I never really figured out what was going on with me. There's some doctors that gave me a bunch of different diagnoses. Um, but I started taking reishi and a lot of it went away. So that's just personal for me, but I've heard a lot of other people having success stories with that too.
mm. And you felt also like the like psychedelic mushrooms were helpful with like breaking addictive
Yeah,
patterns.
probably the most powerful thing you could do to get over that. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting because I know some. I mean, I'm aware of that, but like, there's still people out there who I think they see. And you know, you're in the mushroom world, so you're also familiar with other types of mushrooms. But some people see psychedelic mushrooms as just drugs or scary for that matter, and they don't really want to play with it. And I'm not suggesting that everyone does, but I do still see some misconception around that as well.
Yeah. So they're talking about legalizing it here in New Jersey. I don't know if you heard about that.
Mm-mm.
Um, and I feel, a couple different ways about that. It could be good for a lot of people. There's a lot of people it could be bad for,
Mm-hmm.
especially if they follow like the same model that legalized weed did. I think
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of people smoking weed now that shouldn't be.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but on the other hand, it could be really helpful for some people, especially veterans and people dealing with addiction and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah. It just seems like obviously when you legalize something, then the model could be corrupted a little bit by how they decide to roll out the actual legalization, and then also
Yeah,
you have medical people that want to be involved with that too, which carries its own implications. But um, so, but like it seems like you, I mean, you went really deep into this realm of mushroom farming, and from what I can gather, it seems like you know a lot about it. Was there any background prior, or you were just doing mechanics and you were like, I'm gonna shift my like focus just totally to something different that I'm not doing.
Yeah, pretty
Okay.
much. Just I just decided like I like mushrooms. I've always liked mushrooms. I'm
Mm.
just gonna learn a lot more about it. And there's a lot of good resources online. Shroomery was the first website I went to. There's a lot on there. Um, and then Paul Stamets wrote a whole bunch of books that
Mm.
has most of the information that I use on a daily basis today.
What so there's I mean, I think there's a lot. Is there a lot that grow like naturally in the like in the wild in New Jersey? Because I mean, it's a
Yeah.
pretty moist environment. What would some of those mushrooms be? What would be some things to look out for too if you're actually starting to seek out mushrooms?
Um, the first wild mushroom I found was a chanterelle, which a lot
Mm.
of people spend like years trying to find. So that was pretty cool. That was in central New Jersey. It was right by Sandy Hook at Hartshorn.
Mm.
Um, and I've heard of chanterelles popping up all over New Jersey. We got chicken of the woods, which is a really good, just edible, tastes like chicken, like exactly like it sounds.
Mm.
And then there's hen of the woods or maitake. That grows pretty good amount in New Jersey. You have to know where to look for it.
Mm.
Southern New Jersey has enokitake, which is like another highly valuable mushroom. You can make a living just foraging in New Jersey
Yeah.
if you spend a lot of time.
It's wild because like living in the desert now, the climate is just so different. I don't know if you know anything about desert plants or flora, but yeah, it's just
Nothing.
it's extraordinarily different.
Yeah.
But so in terms of like also when you're working with Two River, you guys have the starting process, and then what are some of the conditions that are beneficial for like the growth of your mushrooms, and what are some of the issues that you may run into? Um, I'm just curious about that process and what that looks like.
So we just have to keep the right balance of carbon dioxide and oxygen in the grow room. Um, and then on top of that, have 80 to 90% humidity. So this time of year, when in New Jersey it was like 60 degrees last week and it's like 20 degrees right now.
Mm-hmm.
So that just fluctuation was so hard to kind of get in tune with the mushrooms. Um, we do it manually. Like if we use sensors, it'll get kind of out of whack. So I have to just constantly monitor like, do they need more humidity, less humidity, more air, less air? Uh, should I lower the temperature, raise the temperature, stuff like that.
Hmm.
Um, and then on top of that, there's contamination that could either come from in the lab, you know, if we didn't change air filters regularly enough, um, if I didn't shower that day or something, that might
Mm-hmm.
ruin like our whole block run for that day. So they're pretty sensitive when you're growing at a big scale like this.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but like I said, I started out in my closet. I hardly saw any contamination there just because it was such a small scale. Um,
Interesting.
it's just once you get to a big scale, there's just all sorts of germs that want to take over.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's sort of crazy, uh, I remember Mr. Sullivan. So Casey Sullivan is the he founded this company,
Hmm.
and and what was like his? Is he still teaching? Do you know?
He's still teaching. Yeah. Uh,
Okay.
this is kind of his retirement plan. So
Okay.
he started it in 2014, partnered with Scott Siskecki. He
Mm-hmm.
owns a few restaurants in Long Branch and Asbury. Um, they started it together, just because they have restaurant connections already. Um, they just figured, let's just grow gourmet mushrooms. There's nobody else doing it in New Jersey, really.
Hmm. Yeah, the only person I'm familiar with, I think it's smiling mushroom. I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
Smiling Earth. Yeah.
Smiling Earth, yeah. So I know Paul who runs that. So that's the only other person that I'm familiar with. But what I notice is that like it seems that whoever's in that field, they seem to be pretty obsessed with that field.
Yeah.
I think that the connection, like I don't know, the fungal network is very symbolic to me of just like this deep connection. Are you familiar with that sort of? I don't know. I don't remember. I know I've seen it in Paul Stamets' podcast and documentary or movie that he made, where it's like that network underneath the ground. So what exactly do you know anything about what's going on there, or is that?
Yeah. I mean, that's another reason that got me into mushrooms, just the symbolism of like how everything should be connected. The fact that
Mm,
we found evidence of that in mushrooms of all things, that just made me
mm,
so happy. That I discovered that, back in 2020 when I was just getting into mushrooms. Um, I would love to do research into stuff like that, but running like a commercial farm, we have like zero time for that.
mm,
We have done work with some different college students. There's this one chick. She's working with NASA, and she's getting her mushroom cultures from us. So
mm,
we're kind of like in that vicariously, but not directly, which is cool. Um,
mm.
just to see that kind of work happen. Um,
It's a trip. It's a
yeah,
trip.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's pretty crazy.
Is what would some of the like how different is it than like other I don't know even know how familiar you are with other like plant life, but how what would like really differ between like growing like fungi versus working with like other plant life? Is it just a totally different starting point and
Um, they're similar in a lot of ways. Like you could look at a mushroom spore as a seed for a plant. It's basically the same thing. There's like genetic material for them to start off with, and then plants branch out, go towards the light. Mushrooms branch out, find nutrients, and just go up to spread spores. So I guess the only differences would be plants consume carbon dioxide, emit oxygen, and then mushrooms are the other way around. Just like us, they breathe oxygen, emit carbon dioxide.
mm,
Um, yeah.
that's interesting. It also yeah, I think it's interesting to hear that you had used like psychedelic mushrooms. I think there's some sort of intelligence with mushrooms generally, not just like psilocybin based mushrooms, but also just whether it be reishi or some of the other species, lion's mane. I feel like they're intelligent beings,
Hmm.
and we're so connected to them as a common ancestor that they have a deeper correlation to us as humans than we might know or understand.
Yeah.
Um, what was that process? If you don't mind talking about it, and again, I can share this or not, but if like, what was that process like of like having addiction issues and then kind of like finding a way out of that?
Um, I guess
Or how'd you realize that you needed to shift something?
I was experimenting with psychedelics a lot back in high
Mm,
school, and then grew up. Life happened, and I hadn't done psychedelics in a long time. Fell in with way worse drugs, and I just hit a low point. I was like, something's got to change, and I know, like, I just wasn't happy in life. I was like, I know what'll definitely make me feel a little bit happier. Give it a shot,
mm,
and the main way it kind of helped was helping me to talk to myself in a friendlier way. Because
mm,
other like before that, I was like, you fucking idiot, what are you doing, stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that. um and mushrooms specifically, like there's a distinction between other psychedelics and mushrooms. Like it's like indescribable, but
Mm-hmm.
it's like they're telling you like you've always had, this feeling. Other drugs you'll be like, whoa, this is crazy, like I feel like I'm not a human. But
Mm-hmm.
mushrooms make you feel like, hey man, you're a human and you got to figure this shit out.
Mm-hmm. That's what I mean. I think there's an intelligence to that, to like, to just, again, not just psychedelic mushrooms, but just mushrooms as a whole. And again, I don't understand it scientifically or how to grow them as much as you do, but from my vantage point, there's a just this deep connection, and there's something so connected to the human being about like fungi. I think it's just, again, that common ancestor. It's like it's like so rooted to the earth, and then it really, there's some sort of symbiotic relationship between us and consuming mushrooms. Obviously, there's dangerous ones as well that you don't want to eat. I'm sure, which
Yeah.
you would know more about um, than myself. But I mean, are you familiar with like Terrence McKenna? Have you listened to his rants before?
Yeah, I haven't listened to a lot of Terrence McKenna. I know of him,
Mm.
and like the few quotes I've heard are like pretty solid.
Yeah,
I've
he's
never
he's a
really went
wild
into
guy.
it. Yeah.
What speaking of like the more dangerous types of mushrooms, I mean, how is there certain things to look out for? Or are there just certain species that, like, once you're familiar with, that you would avoid, or they're telling signs?
Yeah, there's once you know the deadly mushrooms, I mean, there's a lot of deadly mushrooms. But
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of mushrooms that would be really hard to confuse with a poisonous mushroom. Like chicken of the woods, hen of the woods, stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that. There's no poisonous mushroom that looks like that. There's other mushrooms that look like them, but they're not harmful in any way. So you either get the good tasting one or one that's kind of a little bit too chewy or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, some people, so there's Amanita mushrooms. That's like the red with the white dots mushroom from Mario that everybody knows. Um, there's a lot of different versions, or a lot of different uh, there's a lot of different other mushrooms in the Amanita family.
Mm-hmm.
Amanita rubescens is edible, and they're highly prized edibles, but they look almost exactly like a death cap, which is one of the most deadly mushrooms in the world.
Hmm.
You got to be an expert forager to notice stuff like that. It's like really little details, but it
Mm-hmm.
can be done, which is a cool thing.
Did you start foraging once you started with Two River mushroom,
No, I
or was
started
it
foraging. Yeah, I started foraging first. Um,
okay?
I already liked hiking, so I was just out there. I was like, I'll just spend as much time in the woods as I can and see what I find. And then that led me to want to learn more about mushrooms.
Understood. I think interestingly enough, like if you're working as a mechanic, there's some parallels. It's a totally different field, but like you're still specifically working on, like, it's still very intricate work on a specific thing. Like it's
Yeah,
different than what I do, let's say. Um managing a restaurant, like that's like a general thing. So, I think that that's and then so I think that that's cool as well. And um with with the like those oyster mushrooms that you have. So how, I mean, so that starting point is what you were saying earlier, like it's like the sawdust and the, if you could show me the bag too, and it, like, cuz it grows out of the,
I
so
got
that,
another bag here. So
oh sweet. Yeah, feel
this
free to
is,
show.
yeah, show and tell time. This is
So that is what you
it's like
start with?
yeah. So this is sawdust and soy, like 50-50 blend. Can you hear me?
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, and you can see the mycelium. This we inoculated this. What's today? Yeah, like 5 days ago. So in 5 days, this went from just sawdust. Got some mycelium in there.
Wow.
and you can see it just branching out. My camera's real bad, but
Nice. And then what would the next, how much longer until that sort of
probably
comes to
another
be?
5 days. Another
Okay.
5 days, that'll be fully colonized. The whole thing will be white. And
Huh.
then if we don't, so this is the bag, and we have to essentially slice. It's just plastic. Unfortunately, we have to use plastic.
Yeah.
Um, it's just the most efficient way. Otherwise, we'd be
Mm.
cleaning our whole lives. So we just have to cut the plastic, and that's where they know where to grow because there's oxygen there.
Huh. Okay, so then so they're in an environment without oxygen at first, or how's that, like the plastic is sealed?
Yeah, so these bags have they're like specially designed bags for growing mushrooms. They
Mm-hmm.
got these patches in them, and they allow some gas to get out,
Mm-hmm.
but not germs to get in. Essentially,
Hmm.
um, this bag's probably pretty filled with CO2 right now.
Mm-hmm.
So that's in nature. This would be the inside of a tree, and then this would be the bark. So there'd
Hmm.
be a lot of CO2 in there as well. So that's telling the mycelium we're still growing. There's still more food to eat. Don't fruit yet. And then
Huh.
once we cut it open, they get that burst of oxygen. That's when they start pushing out the fruiting bodies.
Huh. Okay, that's wild. And then those oyster mushrooms, those are what you'll sell to the stores and to restaurants.
Yeah. So we just
Huh.
pluck them right off, put
I
them in
feel
the
like
bin.
oysters are good too. Is Angelica's by the like the oyster mushrooms, or do you not know which one specifically?
They kind of get a little mix of everything. Uh,
Mm.
that's the good thing about restaurants is they're usually not specific, and it's really hard for us to grow like a certain amount of one mushroom. It's kind of just throw them all in there, and then we'll see what we get.
And do you personally, or do you guys have like other delivery mechanisms for the mushrooms, or do you guys just whoever's working will do all of the pieces?
Yeah, basically, we have 3 full-time employees and then one part-time guy. Um, one of the owners actually does run deliveries for us right now, so we're still pretty small.
Mm.
And then there's other deliveries. One of us will usually take those.
That's cool
Um,
though.
yeah, everyone here has to be like jack of all trades. Like, got to be able to fix stuff, understand how stuff is running,
Mm.
understand how the mushrooms are growing.
And the farm is in Millstone, you said?
Yeah, Millstone, New Jersey, right out
Nice.
past Freehold. Yeah.
Nice. So is the process like what you just showed me with the oyster mushrooms, or is the process about the same with different species, or is there species specific ways?
Um, it's more or less the same.
Mm-hmm.
The only difference would be how long it takes for them to eat all the food in the bag, essentially, to fully colonize it. Um, there's some like oysters grow start to finish in less than a month, and then
Mm.
we have chestnut mushrooms that take probably almost 2 months, start to finish, maybe even 3 months if it's cold out.
Mm.
There's a lot of different ways you gotta. Each mushroom has its own way it likes to be treated.
Mm.
Reishi's another one. They follow the light instead of the oxygen. Like most mushrooms, they don't care where the light is. They're just gonna grow. They know gravity, so they'll be like, oh, that's down, that's up. We need spores to go out, so they just grow up. But reishi, you can put the light to the side, and then they'll do this like zigzaggy thing. It's really
Mm.
cool.
And what's up with the cordyceps? Like, is that a different thing? I saw that on your Instagram. The cool little
Oh yeah.
the
Uh,
cordyceps.
so yeah, in the wild, that's a fungus that would grow off of a bug. Anyone who's watched Fantastic Fungi would see like that's the best way to understand that life cycle. It's tough to explain. I don't even know if I fully understand it, but I
Mm.
just know how to reproduce it here to grow them. and
How
that's because
how would you reproduce that process?
I would. There's no way I would have figured this out on my own. I
Mm,
had to go to this guy. He's like a Stamets figure, but
mm,
yeah, he's like a Stamets figure. I think he's friends with Paul Stamets too. William Padilla Brown.
mm.
He runs this farm called Mycosymbiotics. They're really cool. You should definitely check them out. If
Okay.
you could interview him, that would be incredible. He's got so much to say.
Yeah, I'd love
Um,
to.
he's like one of the pioneers of growing cordyceps in the U.S.
Mm,
So I took a class with him, and he gave like everyone in the class this really specific recipe. Um, I don't know how he figured this out. We need like kelp meal. You're trying to simulate the inside of a bug's body because that's what
mm.
these mushrooms grow off of. So there's like multivitamin kelp meal, all sorts of crazy stuff. And then you just put that on rice and they just eat it and
That's
grow like
interesting.
crazy. It's I don't understand it, but it works.
And then is it a certain environment they have to exist in, like a dark environment, light, or it just doesn't, or as long as it's deprived of?
Yeah, they need a good amount of light. Actually, they need a lot of light.
Okay,
And if it gets above 70 degrees, they don't grow. And if it gets
interesting.
below 60 degrees, I think they don't grow.
Hmm,
They're super finicky.
that's interesting. There's a lot of health implications though with the cordyceps too, right?
Yeah, that's one mushroom. If you take it, one like medicinal mushroom other than psilocybin, if you take it, you'll feel it working. It gives
Huh.
you energy. Some people say it improves sex drive.
Mm.
I haven't experienced that particularly, but definitely a lot of energy. It's like a
Mm.
better version of caffeine, basically.
Okay, that makes sense because I've seen, and I didn't understand it, but I've seen that they sell like cordyceps as like a pre-workout, or they include it in the
Yeah,
pre-workout.
yeah,
I don't know if it would be enough, but either way, I've heard that some people have benefit with that. So I would like to try that,
yeah.
especially if
You
you
should
actually
definitely
feel
try
it.
it. Yeah.
And what were some of the health outside of like the addiction? Were you having other health issues that kind of brought you towards, let's say, reishi or cordyceps that you started with? Like, what sort of, you were having a lot of pain, obviously.
Yeah. Some of that could have been just like working as a mechanic. You just get a messed up back. But I had
Mm,
some back pain. I got Lyme disease pretty bad twice. So
mm,
I don't know if there's even a doctor that could tell me for sure if that's, if that caused whatever I'm dealing with. But uh, also, I had a pretty bad brain injury when I was younger. Um,
mm.
so it's really tough to pin down what the hell is causing the weirdness. But yeah, reishi in particular. I mean, one thing that I noticed that a lot of other people seem to notice, reishi helps with seasonal allergies, like
Hmm.
a lot. And I haven't had seasonal allergies since then. Um, as far as pain and other stuff like that goes, I would kind of say I would attribute getting over that to working on my diet in general,
Hmm.
as well as like implementing medicinal mushrooms. You also got to eat right and you got to stay active.
Hmm.
So that combination of things for me, that's that's kind of
Yeah,
what worked.
I think well, a lot of people I know people out here are not as familiar, but I know a lot of people who've had Lyme's disease, and that definitely causes other health issues as well. I mean, I think that you can obviously heal from it over time as you have with certain mechanisms, but I have known a lot of people who've had Lyme's, and it can fuck you up pretty good,
Hmm.
especially with inflammation or even neurological symptoms.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. But I do think that our in terms of like whether it be mushrooms or other alternative pathways to actually being healthy, I could see that a lot of the world is starting to open up to that more because the pharma model has its perks, but it's largely like captured by companies that want to make money and not really help people. So I
Yeah.
think that the future of health is we'll still be there with some of the pharmaceutical companies just to like keep people alive, but outside of that, taking care of your health will be more in the hands of, herbalists and people growing mushrooms and people in the exercise field and like people that are actually keeping you healthy.
Mm-hmm.
So that's interesting. And do you get to interact with Casey, the owner of the company, a good amount? Is he present on the farm often, or?
Yeah, as much as he can be, because he's still
Mm.
working as a teacher. Sorry, I just realized the air compressor's going on.
Oh, you're good.
Um, yeah, he's here as much as he can be. Actually, today he's on his way up to JFK to pick up some imported mushrooms. We do that as well. We import chanterelles, black trumpets, like super fancy, exotic mushrooms,
What's
stuff
up
that we
with
can't grow.
the Shen trails are called?
Chanterelles, yeah.
What are they like?
So they smell like apricots, people say.
Uh-huh.
They have just like a really unique kind of, I wouldn't say the flavor's fruity, but it's like, yeah, like a creamy, like brighter flavor.
Mhm.
It's just 100% unique. Like tastes like
Mhm.
a mushroom, but also doesn't taste like any mushroom you've ever had before. It's really tough to explain.
Interesting. And then what were the other ones that he's picking up?
So there's black trumpets.
Okay.
They're like a earthier, almost like a truffle taste to them. Um, that's usually what he gets. He might be getting some other mushrooms too.
Where do they where do they get imported from?
Usually Morocco. I don't know what's
Hmm.
going on in Morocco, but they seem to have a lot of mushrooms.
Interesting. Interesting. My brother went surfing out there, so
Whoa,
yeah, yeah. He was surfed there, I think, like last year or 2 years ago.
damn.
So I gotta ask him. It looked like, at least where he was, it looked like it almost had more of that like deserty climate. But
That's what I thought. Yeah.
yeah. But I mean, all I know is they would buy like $5 steaks and cook them up out there. And uh, yeah, my youngest brother James, so he travels a lot, and then um, he works when he's home. He works for the butcher's block. I think that
Oh.
the Smiling Earth supplies them, or at least they used to. I'm not sure if they still do.
We also used to supply them. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I know a
That's
few
maybe why
guys
I was
there.
familiar. I'm familiar with the company, I think, because I've seen it there. But I felt like I was uniquely familiar with them for another reason. I wasn't sure, but because
Ah,
I'm familiar with like Tommy D and the Butcher's Block, and
cool.
then down the street is the local 130 seafood.
Oh,
So
yeah.
it's cool that like the one thing I actually miss, and I'm sure that these companies exist out here in Arizona as well, but like to an extent. But there's definitely like something about like those suburban New Jersey companies where I don't know, you have like Two River Mushroom and Local 130 and all these companies with people that I'm familiar with, just kind of like supplying all these local restaurants. So I do miss that element of
Oh,
being on the East Coast.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
but
definitely still here. A little bit of like friend to friend, help another business out.
mhm.
Yeah, it's good when we can do that.
And do you know anything about? Um, I'm not sure if like the Pacific Northwest is a big like mushroom growth climate. What would is it different than the Northeast, or is there other species or things that grow out there, or is it
Oh,
just?
yeah. Uh, the Pacific Northwest is like, as far as wild mushrooms go, that's probably the place you want to go.
Mm,
Especially like Washington. That's where Paul Stamets is from. Uh,
mm,
I think that's where like the biggest wild mushroom in the world has been found.
mm.
I might be wrong on that, but definitely a very big mushroom is in Washington. It's like about the size of a mountain.
Mm,
Um, and then I know of some mushroom farms out in, I think it's Northern California. Um, so we have climate control, humidity control. They don't have any of that because it's year round. It's just the perfect temperature and perfect humidity. They just like have shipping containers with the doors wide open,
hmm.
which I'm so jealous of.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, I'm sure.
That's a
trying to
cheat code.
navigate the New Jersey climate as well. It's so inconsistent, and as you were saying earlier, in like December, and you'll have 50 to 60 degree days, and then the 20 degree day.
Yeah.
So it's challenging, and
Uh-huh.
so the again when you're trying to mimic, I'm just go relaying for my own information, but going back to like what's in the bags is trying to mimic like what's inside of a tree essentially.
Yeah.
That's the environment that mushrooms like.
Yeah. These mushrooms, particularly. There's,
Okay.
psilocybin, you would grow that in a totally different way. Um,
Mm.
but all these hardwood loving mushrooms, yeah, they love hardwood.
And with psilocybin, is it what differs about the way that that works?
Um, so with gourmet mushrooms, we're taking. I should have brought up some grain spawn, but
Mm.
we inoculate with essentially just picture a bag of oats, like uncut, just whole oats, like horse feed. Um, you put a slice of a petri dish in there with the mycelium on it, and then those grains are what you use to transfer the mycelium to the grow bags. So for the gourmet exotic mushrooms, the grain is only a medium of transfer just to get the mycelium into the substrate that they're going to eventually get all their food from. With psilocybin, what a lot of people do is you make grain spawn, but that grain spawn is the food that the psilocybin are going to eat for the rest of their life.
Mm.
So once those grains are colonized, you mix them into something with no nutrients at all. And that's what eventually tells them, oh, okay, it's time to make fruiting bodies and reproduce.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting. It's a crazy. Like I said earlier, there's still implications around psilocybin where people feel like it's a drug or it's a scary thing. They're interested in it, but they're like, I can never do that. I'll freak out.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand where they're coming from, but also it's also important to be curious about the future. Like that's part of our past, and I believe it'll be part of our future as well.
Absolutely.
Like
Yeah.
and it is like I said, I wouldn't suggest that everyone does it because that could be harmful. But the idea that we should just box it out and call it scary is also harmful. And then
Yeah.
the idea that we should box it in and make it only for medical purposes is also dangerous because you don't want to just have doctors serving up nature all the time.
Ah, yeah. I didn't think about that one.
Yeah. Well, me and my friend
Yeah.
have discussed it a lot, and then I've discussed it with a lot of people. But that again, like you said, the way that they legalized weed, that had its problems, not because it's put through a medical model, but with psychedelics, it seems like the way that they're being able to market it or push it is for addiction or for trauma and those types of things. And it's all true, but if you push it through that way, that means that you're probably going to have to go through a doctor's office or get a certain diagnosis just to consume something that's growing naturally, which also like it's a way that Americans trust institutions. We trust that like we put more trust in the authoritative figure than we do in our own selves, and like
Yeah.
if from your experience, maybe if you were eating mushrooms in the woods versus eating it in a doctor's office, it's probably a lot more almost like nerve wracking to be in an office with a doctor than it is to be in the woods.
That'd be 100% different experience. Yeah. You're not going to get the same thing out of that at all.
Yeah. So and then where in Jersey more specifically are you like if you're foraging, what are some places that you like to go?
Uh,
Um,
I mean, Hartshorn Woods. That's where I first found the chanterelles.
mm,
I don't think a lot of people would say that's a good foraging spot, but I love foraging there. I found all sorts of different mushrooms there: reishi, amanitas, chanterelles, chicken of the woods. Everything I
mm,
want is there. Um, Near the Delaware Water Gap is a good spot for sure, and
mm,
then North Jersey. that's where most people would go for mushroom foraging.
Okay.
Um, Pro tip: if anyone out there's looking for morels, old apple orchards, you have to look for apple orchards that never use pesticides because mushrooms are bioaccumulators. But morels love to grow in old apple orchards, and there's one
Hmm.
in northern Jersey.
That's cool. And before we just a couple questions before we wrap it, but is what would if someone wanted to get into this field, is there a starting point of what you think that they should purchase or learn before going into it, or sometimes is it just like a learn through experience
Yeah,
situation?
I would say learning through experience was the best way I could do it. Um, there's probably different types of people that could read a bunch of stuff and learn. Um, but personally, I got the mushroom bug. I couldn't stop researching. I couldn't stop like going out and finding new mushrooms.
Mm.
Now I'm like a little bit complacent. Like I'm used to seeing these mushrooms every day. But I think the best way is to get out there, start finding wild mushrooms, and try to identify them. Facebook is a really good. That's probably the only thing I use Facebook for anymore. Is hey, is this the right mushroom? Is this what I think it is?
Mm.
Because there's a really big community of mushroom freaks on Facebook,
Mm.
and they'll gladly help you out.
Hell yeah.
Um, that's the best way.
Hell yeah, man. Well, we'll wrap it at that, and I appreciate you doing this.
Yeah,
I'm
of
going to
course.
have you stay in the studio for a moment. I'll hit this button.